Well, good afternoon and welcome to the 11th episode of COVID Connect. I'm glad you can be here. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. And thanks as always to all the folks who convened this in the first place. When things started breaking about 10 weeks ago, these companies and the individuals from these companies on a Thursday night got together and basically responded to the call that we put out and said, can we get the community together? So our friends at Mich Bio, at Keystone, at the U of M, in multiple groups, the MedHealth Cluster, Spectrum Health Innovations, Beaumont, Gentherm, Grand Valley State University, folks from MEDC, Ann Arbor Spark, Public Sector Consultants, our friends at Celsi and at TechTown Detroit, and more, got together and got word out to the community. And we came together as a community and we had the chance to really, I think, make an impact and connect people. It has been so cool to hear all the stories. And every week we're hearing how you made connections through this show and by being put together by this community. So thanks to each and every one of you. And thanks for being here today. Today, we've got a big announcement. And that announcement is that as of this week, the COVID Connect name is going to be going away. COVID isn't over. It's going to be with us for a while, as we've been hearing. The diagnostic aspects are going to tell the true story in the long term, and we'll all be learning more about it. There's still concerns about PPE. There's still concerns about a second wave. But right now, we want to expand the conversation. I didn't say that there's not going to be a show next week. We want to expand the conversation next week. And it's going to be really exciting because it was about sometime last year that we started wanting to get the community together to talk about stuff. And we started doing that in a one-off way. I remember it was Patty Glaza from Invest Detroit had posted something about startup budgeting. And I said, Patty, this is awesome. We need to sit down and just talk about this. Sure, I've got my business and you've got your business, but we just need to talk about this because you've got a great idea here and let's just have the conversation. So we did. You can find that on our website. What we've discovered over the last 3 months has been that this webinar format is a great medium for having those kinds of conversations, except we can have 2 or 3 of those a week. That's where this is going. So as always, we're going to do Fda Education, especially if there is stuff related to EUAs. We're going to keep talking about it, but you're going to see that it's going to bridge into new things. We're going to start talking about other FDA issues. Maybe you've got questions about 510Ks or how a pre-sub works or things like that. We're going to be bridging into those topics as well as we expand. We're going to continue to have featured guests, and they're going to come from the ranks of startups, investors, conveners, healthcare professionals, hospital systems, test houses, material suppliers, manufacturers, researchers. The goal here is to really bring people together like we've been doing and you've all been contributing to, but in an even larger way, all the way across the whole MedTech community, especially in Michigan, but even beyond. We were thankful to have many guests on from across the country as we've been doing COVID Connect. And then, similar to what we've been doing during COVID Connect, we're going to be having office hours. We're going to be having a Q&A session so that any MedTech regulatory development question is fair game. And if we can't answer it on the show, we can hopefully get you connected to somebody who does. So that's where this is going starting next week, Friday at 2 p.m. We're going to keep the time slot. You'll see emails about this coming out this week. But this is where we're heading next. We're going to expand the conversation. It doesn't mean we're necessarily going to stop talking about PPE or EUAs. When there are updates, we're going to bring them to you, but the conversation is going to expand in this post-COVID world. And we're going to start talking about all of our favorite startup med device topics and new product development med device topics. So thank you for being a part of this. What we're going to welcome at the end of today's session is your thoughts and your ideas. If you're on this call today, you're in a unique position to help us shape what that upcoming set of shows looks like. Who do you want us to talk to? What topics do you want us to address, especially in the first weeks? We're going to try to draw from a wide range of guests. And so we would like to hear from you who you think would be interesting for us to talk to. With that, just a couple ground rules. Send your suggestions for the new set of shows to info@intobeing.com. Guests, topics, questions that you have. Tell us especially also if there's particular things that you've found helpful relative to COVID that you believe are going to continue and you want us to keep you up to date on those, let us know because we would be happy to include that. Please note the webinar will be available. Use the chat box to all panelists and all attendees. Get off of mute, keep it brief. Do tell us your thoughts, your ideas, your needs, your efforts. We want to hear from you, especially today, when we want to hear where you want to see this show go as we open it up to all MedTech new product development topics. We do medical device development at Into Being, regulatory compliance submissions, design for manufacturing, prototyping. Let us know how we can help. We've been so pleased to be part of so many efforts throughout this COVID period and with the EUAs and everything else. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit. FDA has been busy this week, and among other things, they've been removing more respirators from the authorized list. This is getting to be a relatively long list. Many of these from China. These respirators are deauthorized from the EUA. And so please, if you're in the business of importing respirators, check, because these have actually now been noticed by FDA, recognized, and these are no longer suitable for importation under FDA's EUA. So that's the latest with the imported respirators. I must have seen this one 3 or 4 times, probably in the last 24 hours, and it reads like a rebuke, oh no, you did the wrong thing. It says, use the correct cycle and compatible N95 respirators when decontaminating respirators with the STERRAD sterilization systems. It's a letter to healthcare providers. Apparently, even though there is an approved decontamination cycle for STERRAD decontamination systems that, like we've said before, have a place in hospitals. They've already got them there. They've been using them. Apparently, they're making some mistakes in the use from time to time. It's the express cycle for the STERRAD 100NX system, and maybe not all systems have the express cycle. They actually recommend getting that cycle installed if you don't have it. It sure sounds like somebody put maybe the wrong kind of masks in and hit the wrong button. But this is just goes to show, as we expand into larger FDA topics, this is something that FDA normally asks about, which is compatibility of systems with other medical devices. And it's very important with reprocessing, but it's also important with other compatibility issues. You make a surgical device and it's supposed to be compatible with another one. How is it going to be? And normally in a 510K or a de novo process, FDA is going to ask you questions about that and expect to see a lot of compatibility data. They have, I think, very graciously and very boldly accepted many things, knowing that there were still unknowns. And here's an example of some of those unknowns coming out with the STERRAD system, but that open letter is out there. News on the reprocessing front here from OR Today. FDA has updated their reprocessing guidance for masks, and they've given some clarity. If you recall us talking previously, FDA went straight to the 6 log reduction threshold for decontamination of respirators. Now, normally 6 log is considered sterilization, and it's very, very appropriate if you're going to take a device from one patient and use it directly on another patient. But many in the industry were arguing that 6 log doesn't make sense if I'm a respirator user, and as we heard from our friend Nikki Kennedy, I've got to use that thing for 3 weeks. Well, I'm not necessarily touching it to the patient, but I'm going to have to use it for 3 weeks. Can I do anything to reduce that bioburden? And FDA has relaxed that 6 log level a little bit. They've now made it clear that there are 3 tiers. So there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. They still have a 6 log level for tier 1 and tier 2. There's a higher barrier, the most resistant spores or mycobacterium for tier 1 decontamination. And if you can achieve that, you can actually offer the masks back to multiple users. You don't have to limit it to the same user. Tier 2, 6 log reduction for a less critical or less hard to kill viruses and bacteria, but still a 6 log reduction if you want to give it back to them. In tier 3, 3 log reduction, which is good, except it comes with the CDC's reuse recommendations, which has a time delay built into it. So there's a sense in which you have to wait for those masks to come back. But FDA has updated this, If you're interested in decontamination, whether you're providing a decontamination system or you're with a healthcare system and you're asking, what can I do? Both that STERAD information and this decon information should be of interest to you. I want to point out to you too that the diagnostic FAQs and town halls continue to ramp up. If you're on the diagnostic side or you want to get into the weeds on the things that we've touched on, both Brandon McNaughton and Dr. Ing Pottinger have talked with us in previous weeks about the complexities of diagnostic testing, what we do and don't know when we do those tests. And Dr. Pottinger last week, I thought her presentation was wonderful. And she basically showed us how you really have to do multiple tests, multiple different types of tests before you really have a sense of what's going on, even with a single patient, let alone a population. And so the focus really comes down, if we want to know the story of what we've all been through together and continue to go through together, it's going to come down to these diagnostic tests. And so FDA has some great FAQs on the website. We'll make sure this gets posted to the links afterwards. They are asking and answering questions about who's distributing tests, who's offering serology tests, what do I do if I'm offering a test kit? It's worth noting that there are some folks who had gotten sort of a conditional approval or at least provided notification to FDA that they were going to be providing tests, but they never really followed through on it. And so they've been removed from the notification list. So it'd be important to check and make sure that any tests you're considering aren't on that removal list. That's in this FAQ. They start to talk about the different types of tests available, and they have stuff about specimen collection. The list goes on and on. So if you have any interest in testing, and certainly if you're out there acquiring tests, it'd be really good to read through this and understand where FDA's concerns are. To that same end, on June 3rd, FDA is going to be holding another town hall, and get a load of this, they're going to do it June 10th, June 17th, and June 24th, because I think they're having a lot of interest in this for clinical laboratories and commercial manufacturers. They can be kind of technical talks. If you're not in the development of COVID tests, it might be a little hard to swim through. But if you really are interested and you want to get in the details, these town halls are phenomenal. And of course, the information will come out of them, and it'll affect how we do testing as a society. So please tune into those as you have availability. I want to show you one more thing here, which is that Stryker just got their clearance or authorization for an N95 decontamination system. Guess what? It's vaporous hydrogen peroxide once again. So as we've seen, the VHPs have been mostly what has made it through, as well as some of the decon systems that are already out there installed in hospitals. But add Stryker to the list of companies doing decontamination with vaporous hydrogen peroxide. So that is some of the news today. I want to let you know also that we now have 82 test kit manufacturers and commercial laboratories, 32 high complexity tests, and there aren't any new ventilators out there at the moment. No new ventilators this week. But we think, FDA has done a really good job with these emergency use authorizations. They've been communicating with people. They've been as open as they can. We've seen the agency take risks that we haven't seen them take before, which has been very encouraging. And so it's very exciting to see that. What we're going to do today, it's going to be a very short show today. We are going to open it up really soon here to an open forum for your questions. We don't have any particular guests today as we come to the end of what is COVID Connect. Like I said earlier, we're going to talk next week, opening up the conversation to design and development, new product development issues. I'm going to put this list back up on the screen of what we are going to be talking about. If we can get our screen to work. No, there's always got to be one Zoom issue per session. Let's try this, and let's try this. There we go. We're going to be talking starting next week to folks pulled from the pool of startups, investors, conveners, healthcare professionals, hospital systems, test houses, material suppliers, manufacturers, researchers, and other suppliers. So we're going to go to Q&A and open forum next, but here's what I want you all to think about. And we're going to open it up to as many folks as want to give us their opinions today. Who do you want to see on here? What topics do you want to see us cover in the first weeks of the new webinar series starting next Friday at 2 p.m.? Who would you like us to talk to? I mean, I think of folks like our friend Valerie Obenchain over at AIRS, who's been working on a respiratory therapy alarm. Obviously, it wasn't something that was going to pop through and get an EUA, but as we've learned that things like COVID have a high respiratory infection rate associated with them, this is totally appropriate for us to go and start to talk about startups, not just ones in the COVID space, but ones in just about any space, and start to open the conversation back up to where are we as a community. It's this community that came together. It's this community that wants to continue on together, talking about the solutions that we're bringing forward for healthcare. So think about that. I'm going to welcome you on live in just a few minutes. Right now, we're going to go over to our Q&A. I think I do see one Q&A in the box here. And from Rainer, we've got, are there issues being identified with the Battelle hydrogen peroxide N95 decontamination system? That is a great question, Rainer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to we're going to take a direct look at the FDA's website. We haven't heard a lot. Of course, the big complaints that you've heard with Battelle, the first one on the market there, were that you had to ship the materials to them. And that was just, I think, more than people wanted to do. We haven't heard a lot of the numbers or anything like that in terms of how many folks have used it. But we're going to bring this up here, personal protective equipment EUAs. And Battelle decontamination system. Nothing looks to have changed with them. You would expect to see something up here if there was anything really major, but nothing looks to have changed. As you recall, though, they had to ship to Battelle, and I think that's what made some of these other systems much more attractive. What we're still missing is the systems for the small companies. And I know that there's a lot of folks working on that right now, but there need to be systems out there that, you know, the small groups, whether they're healthcare related or not, can put in their back closet and use. And that's still a missing link here. So we do wait to hopefully have some of those out there for the next wave, whenever that may be. Great question, Rainer. Let's go out there and see who else has a thought or a question. Feel free to raise your hand or type it into the chat box. Any questions or comments with respect to EUAs in general, FDA questions in general, or more specifically, where do you want to go next with this? What kinds of conversations do you want to have with startups, with investors, with folks in the community? Where do you want to go next? I've got Roger Edheimer. You are live with us, Roger.
Hi, Gene. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. As always, I appreciate the show. It's terrific. You do a great job. My question is, on the email you sent out, you were going to give some information. I thought you were going to give some information on the updated gowns and other apparel EUA. And I'm just kind of curious about what you're hearing about hospital gowns being shipped from China. I'm kind of hearing some stuff that the Chinese government is not letting so much stuff go out of China because they're concerned about a second wave. Any truth to that at all that you're hearing?
I know we've heard those kinds of things, and I know that the international import-export stuff has been a big challenge. So I think there's truth to what you're hearing in terms of challenges there. I couldn't necessarily put my finger on all the reasons for it. Thank you for the reminder. We were going to cover gowns and somehow it fell out of our lineup here. We're going to go to that right now. Feel free to stay live here and we can discuss as we go. And then we'll go to, right after that, we'll go to Robert's question. Here it is, 522, the gowns and other apparel EUA here. And what I think what this is doing is it's giving a little more clarity. They do note in this that they are including in it, if I can find the spot here, they are including not only gowns and their proper labeling and what else you have to do for them. Here's the list of things that they consider gowns and other apparel: conductive shoe and shoe cover, operating room shoes, surgical apparel accessory, non-surgical isolation gown, operating room shoe cover, surgical helmet, and surgical cap. Those are all included. I did notice down here that they include decontamination of these things as well. We heard recently FDA talked about doing some decontamination of other PPE, and I notice here that they are talking about this scope includes authorized gowns and other apparel that have been decontaminated pursuant to the terms and conditions of an authorized decontamination system. So they are including the reuse of those. It's a little strange because that hasn't necessarily been, we've had shortages, but we didn't hear about people having to necessarily reuse gowns. Maybe they were. The labeling here is going to be very similar to what you've seen before, making it clear what it is for, not including any antimicrobial or other types of things. Of course, there's the barrier protection level that goes along with some of the non-breathing PPE, and warnings against not using it in flammable environments, and quantifying what level of barrier protection it provides. So I think this is a clarification. This is a place where FDA hadn't spent a lot of time, and now they're giving a little bit better guidance here. Like the other EUAs, this one gives you a pretty nice list of what you need to say about it and what you can't say about it. And so if you take these as a bit of an action item list, it'll give you some guidance. If I've still got you there, Roger, are there any specific questions you had related to the gowns?
No, that's you pretty much covered what I was looking for. I appreciate it.
Hey, that's awesome, Roger. Thank you for the reminder and for bringing that up. We've loved to have you on the show. And while I've got you there, Roger, let me ask you a quick question, if I can put you on the spot.
Sure.
What's been the most useful to you about the show as it stood, and what would you like to see in the future, just from where you are in your day-to-day work and what you do with your company? What's the most useful topics that you'd like to hear about going forward?
No, I just appreciate it. As I'm an importer, but I'm not that familiar with FDA. And if you start reading all the information with FDA, and you get confused. And I think you break it down into simple terms for a person like myself to understand. And and I just I'm looking for certain information on gowns or masks. But I find that other topics that you discuss are enjoyable to listen to, and gives you a good feel what's going on with the whole situation.
Well, that's great, Roger. I really appreciate that. We will definitely try to keep import concerns in the list of things that we talk about. So because it's really an issue all the time, and it's come to a highlight with COVID, but it's always an issue. And because it might be import of completed devices or parts of devices, and we've certainly seen that in the past. So we will keep those concerns front and center as well, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Great. Going over to Roger. Roger, you are live with us. I'm sorry. Robert, you are live with us.
Hello. Yes, my name is Rob Reiser. I'm with Promontory. We work primarily in the United States and Europe. I can answer that question about the China withholding materials, because I got it from Austrian intelligence. It's a long story, but they are cutting back greatly on exports. It's because they are afraid of a second wave, and well, they like charging $5 for a mask. So, but my real question is, my company we got tired of the import challenges and decided, since we're business guys, mostly in the M&A space, but we decided that we're going to bring a manufacturing line for surgical masks here to the United States as the first part, and then branch into other ancillary materials, gowns, hoodies, things like that. But the learning curve for dealing with FDA is pretty high, and I know that I know they want to bring that manufacturing capacity back into the U.S. And I'm wondering, where can I get some help to do that?
In terms of the education with regard to FDA, or with
yes,
manufacturing capacity?
Manufacturing capacity, FDA, it's sort of all strings together. I'm used to having a fairly steep learning curve when we go into the variety of businesses that we've been in. Trust me, until I did a wind farm in Poland, I had no idea what wind farms were. So we just completed that, and then we're going to do an undersea line from somewhere offshore into Stockholm. So so I'm not afraid of the learning part. It's just the labyrinth of regulation and frankly incentives to do this. So,
well, you put your finger on something that's always been an issue in the med tech space. One of the things that we often tell folks is, class 1 devices are often easier than you think they should be. And oftentimes we'll deal with folks who are researching a topic, and it's like, wow, you could just pop this out there and it'd be a class 1 device, and you could go sell it, and it's often a hesitance to let go of it. On the other hand, when it comes to a class 2 device and 510K and everything else, the burden is usually higher than people anticipate. And it's really understanding, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? How big is my market? Is it worth taking the time in there?
I haven't heard that in a long time.
So that's something, Robert, if you'd like to reach out afterwards, that's what Into Being does. We do development and education on development and the design and development process, design controls, and everything else. So if you want to talk about how we can help you, that we'd be happy to talk to you about that. And more generally, if you have any specific questions that you want to throw out here for our audience to learn from, we would love to, if there's something you want to field, we're happy to answer it live and turn it into a discussion, because I think these things, the more we as a community and as a society can understand what we're up against when it comes to getting a device cleared through FDA. That shouldn't be hidden knowledge or private knowledge, or you got to come talk to me, or otherwise you can't get this knowledge. It really needs to be something that we understand as a community. And then what we're doing with each other is working to actually bring those things to market. So again, if you have any specific questions you want to throw out there, we could definitely talk about it.
You've obviously never worked with the SEC, so they're nuts. But anyway,
great.
All right. So how do I reach out to you to do that?
You can send a note to info@intobeing.com. Just reference our conversation, and okay. I can also reach out to you afterwards based on the contact list. So be happy to follow up with you. Appreciate that, Rob. Let me ask you this too. Like, do you have any top level questions that you would like to see us address on future shows, independent of an independent conversation? I got to put you on the spot. This is the putting people on the spot day. I get to turn the tables on everybody.
That's okay. I suppose my overarching concern in sort of watching this dumpster fire unfold is that I really get the feeling that there's so much conflicting information out there. Not just from you know, what the trends of the disease are, what we need to do here. We don't need to wear masks. We do need to wear masks. Maybe we need to wear a mask. And how we confront getting good information out. And I don't think that's been solved yet. I really don't. So, I mean, it's a real 30,000 foot level, but it's something that I'm at the point I don't know what to believe anymore. There's a shortage of masks. There isn't a shortage of masks. A mask goes for $5. No, a mask goes for $2. A mask goes. I will be glad to get back to the point of where we're selling masks and gowns and things at what they cost before all this.
What they cost to make. No, it's a good point, Robert, and I think it brings up something that I sort of wanted to touch on, which is I think we need as a community to celebrate the fact that you know, here in Michigan we wanted to shut down with the goal to flatten the curve, and we don't know where that curve is going to go in the future, but that happened, and now we're sort of into there's lots of uncertainty, and there's lots of what does this mean, and we're not going to know what this all means for 2 years, and not until after we see what happens in the coming months. And I think there's a level at which we all just have to advocate for charity to each other. And I might just sacrifice a few of my freedoms for the next person down the road who's got some concerns, even if I don't share them. And we're gonna stay in this together until we get through it. So
a good book to read in all of this is called The Spanish Lady. It's about the Spanish flu epidemic, and I went back and reread it, and it prescient.
That's great, Robert. Thanks for the recommendation. We'll have to take a look at that. I appreciate you coming on the call today.
Thank you.
I want to touch on one thing that we're seeing in the chat box here, and I want to ask maybe Olaf, if you're willing to come on live and raise your hand. You've been a frequent attender of the show. You made an interesting comment there. I wonder if you would bring that on live to us. There's his hand right there. Olaf, you are live. Can you bring your thought or your concern out to the group here?
Yeah, I mean, many of the people who join this call are actively engaged in ramping up supply of various elements of fighting the spread of the pandemic, of treatments, diagnostics, and so forth. So face mask is one example. Respirators, we heard about that, you know, these bivalves and so forth, test kits, etc. And so there's still a lot of effort being put into this, trying to meet the demand of what we think is really needed. And so the question, of course, is how much is still needed, right? So, you know, individual companies, like, I mean, we just had somebody from Ford on the line, right? So they changed the factory over to produce respirators. Like, I mean, how much, you know, does an auto manufacturing plant still need to be switched over in order to meet respirator demand? Because that's a huge investment of time and money. And so the question is about how big is the gap, and is there any way to try to forecast if we're going to be okay in terms of supply? And I'm aware that one may want to have, like, maybe, you know, somewhat additional excess capacity, like 120% of what's needed. And then, you know, there's other opportunities for export. But right now, I can't really gauge how much we are short of either element along the equipment that's needed to fight the disease.
You know, this is a great question. I got a couple of questions for you, Olaf. And before I ask those, I want to just check in. I know we have Leonard Brandon on the call. I don't know, Leonard, if you are able to chat, but do raise your hand if you're able to. I had a question for you about just that, because Ford is working on PPE. We'd love to know what the current status of that is. But I guess, Olaf, from your perspective, what is there's the raw data of where is stuff needed. We've in the past had some of those PPE and bed tracking spreadsheets up from the state of Michigan. We've seen that sort of stagnate a lot. It's sort of like there's a few folks who say they've got 0 to 6 days of something, but it really hasn't changed in a long time. And so we're not hearing about these widespread needs. That's not to invalidate any of the challenges that have happened. But I guess that's an open, I'm going to ask it as an open question. And so then to you all, what do you think the best way to get that information out? Would a segment here where we're touching on that through, I think we need a better metric. I think that'd be my point, is we need a better metric. The PPE and bed tracking metric isn't telling us a lot at this point, because the healthcare systems seem, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the healthcare systems seem to have what they need. It's now more about companies needing access to it, but we're hearing a lot of people saying they're starting to find their sources for those things. So I guess, your thoughts on what's the, number one, if there is information to communicate, what's the best way to communicate it? What format would be the most helpful? And then for the group, what are you hearing? Because I think what we're hearing here is that the needs are getting met, which is now going to probably create a glut in the market. I don't want to be pessimistic in that way, but I'd love to hear from anybody about what you're hearing. I guess first over back to you, Olaf, since you brought this up, and I really appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, so I'm aware that there are, in the next few months, that there are a number of additional face mask manufacturers coming on stream. And so they may run into the situation that there isn't a huge additional demand right now, because the national stockpile and whatnot has been revamped, refilled, and so forth, and they can supply from there. But then also, we've heard from a number of political leaders, for example, Governor Cuomo and others, that like, holy crap, we have, outsourced way too much from America to China. Now, why is all of this stuff being made there? And then, if the virus hits the fan, then suddenly, we can't get this stuff, or, we better not get it from there anymore because of the risk situation. And so is there going to be the future demand from inside the US manufacturing that may or may not be met already at this point in time? Because like you say, it would be sad if we build a lot of capacity in the US if we're already there right now. Because we're not going to have this face mask and respirator demand that we have now in normal situations, right? Between any pandemic, which is hopefully the next one far, far away. But so I hear more about people wanting to connect and seeing how they can help, how they can sell, how they can collaborate with others to continue to ramp up supply and offer additional capacity or improved products and so forth. So on the innovation side, I think it's okay to push ahead, because if there are better devices in the future, then great. Let's hopefully get to that, through FDA approval, et cetera. But I think right now a lot of companies and entrepreneurs are operating a little bit in a vacuum of like, okay, how much is the need really happening? So everybody sees the need right now because all of the newspapers, the news, like, oh my God, we're still in the middle of the pandemic and there may be a second wave, et cetera, et cetera. But what's really needed? I'm afraid that the best way to address that is to kind of centralize this type of information of demand. So I don't know if, for example, hospitals, individual companies from Michigan could bring that together at the Department of Health inside Michigan. And, then again, maybe even ideally on a national level, like we heard last week from Dr. Pottinger, that, she had suggestions that best would be met on a federal level, right, about these antibody tests and so forth. And at this point, this hasn't happened yet. So, even you, as an articulate, well-informed person, can't really influence that a whole lot. So I guess it's really a question, an appeal also to a state and national level government to say like, hey, help us figure out what will be needed in the future.
Yeah, and I think that if you really get into the weeds on that, I guess two comments. I think you're spot on. There's this vacuum of information right now, and people don't quite know which way to go. Do make sure, and Olaf, maybe you can comment on this. The Pure Michigan Business Connect is maintaining a list of suppliers and needs. They have a method for putting together folks with need for PPE with suppliers and vice versa. So once again, and we can post that if that link has gone stale, but the state of Michigan has stepped up to the plate with that Pure Michigan Business Connect site. I don't know if you've had any experience with that directly.
I'm glad you actually remind me of that website. That's good. I'd looked at that a couple of weeks back, and it's a good reminder to do that again. Yep.
And that's a place where they're at least trying to do that convening. I'm sure that we've got contacts there. If you have suggestions as to ways that could be better, I think that's where we're seeing most of that information aggregation going. But I think your point is well taken, that we need to keep that part of the conversation going. So just like we heard earlier about, well, import has a crisis right now, and we're all paying attention to imports like we never have before, and that's not going to go away in the future. So keep imports as a part of the discussion and as a part of the show. I think what I'm hearing you say is, look, don't let the confusion of the in-betweens. We're not done with this. We don't know where we are, but don't let this confusion of the in-betweens stop the connections from happening between folks who especially need PPE and folks who are making it. And I think we hear that loud and clear. I see. I'm going to keep you on the line for just a minute here, Olaf. So don't leave.
Yep.
I'm going to let Rainer come on. Rainer, I don't know if your question or comment pertained to what Olaf and I were just talking about, or if it's something separate. But we'd welcome your thoughts.
Hey, Gene, it's pronounced Reiner.
Reiner, I'm sorry.
But that's okay.
Like Rob Reiner.
No, you've done much better than many people do. Really simply, I'm a trade commissioner with the Canadian Consulate in Detroit, looking at all of this stuff in healthcare and in medical devices and whatever else. And I've really appreciated a lot of the insight I've gotten from your show. And with all of this PPE stuff, it's become very clear to me, first in the case of the ventilators. In Canada, we went out and did very much like the US and decided that somebody needed to produce for us some 30,000 ventilators. And I think the number that is being produced and is on order now is more than that. When I took a look at the number of beds in Canada, it turned out that we were producing or going to produce enough ventilators for one ventilator for every 3 beds in the entire country, which is kind of unsupportable.
Yeah.
I also looked, and given that the major ventilator users in the US got together with Trump and put together a lend use program, I don't think the kind of demand that was present at the beginning, when nobody had all of the rules of when you do and don't ventilate people, ended the controversy pretty quickly. However, in the US, you're busily producing 130,000 ventilators at the minimum, and Mr. Trump is already giving those away to Russia and Mexico. I think it's going to be a great day for third world countries' medical systems and getting donations of some fairly sophisticated equipment. When it comes down to the PPE stuff, I think the problem is really a supply chain issue, and because particularly in the US, you are a for-profit system, there was never an incentive for the medical companies, the medical systems, the hospitals, to put together a substantial stockpile in the first place. The US government decided that its job was to stopgap when there was a small emergency someplace, and probably didn't have a big enough stockpile themselves. And the folks that retail, design, and distribute the stuff found that you could save a penny a nickel per mask by having them done in China or other low cost countries. And the Chinese saw an advantage to manipulating the supply somewhat to up the price and increase their margins when they got the chance. Not to mention all the other players that got involved. So the rush to go and innovate and come up with, different ways of doing masks, different ways of doing all of the rest of the PPE, got all kinds of, and I'm not trying to be mean, inefficient ways of making something that might work out there on the market, whether it was, Billy in the garage with his 3D printer producing 100 masks a week, or whether it was grandma and her friends sitting around the kitchen table converting old handkerchiefs into masks, or whether it was somebody who'd gone the next step and found a way to automate a system for taking what's essentially plain garbage bag material and heat sealing it to come up with something like a coverall. Now, all of those people have been doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. Some of them have been donating it. Some of them have been putting it out at pricing that's not supportable by the real world condition when it comes. And we've now gotten to the point where folks like Ford and others in the real manufacturing business have invested in tooling to do things like the headbands for the face masks. And rather than having a 3D printing machine print for 2 hours to come up with one of these headbands, they're shooting out 20, 30 headbands with each cycle of a mold for 3 seconds using 3 cents worth of material. And with a little bit of labor added on, they're putting on the acetate sheet. So that $1.50 mask is probably not far away again. Plus, there's been those who've been.
What you're saying reminds me a lot of way back in 2009. I think we told this story early on in these COVID Connect calls, but the U.S. government put forward $500 million for the development of a low-cost ventilator, and they very quickly sourced a design that was out there by a company called Newport. And they put the money up, and they had, I think, 3 prototypes made. And then Newport was bought, as the crisis died down, Newport was bought by a larger company, and the larger company eventually decided that it wasn't a profit center for them, or whatever the story was exactly. And so that low-cost $3,000 ventilator that was developed, there were prototypes, they were on the way to clearance, was dropped for commercial reasons, as you say. And again, I don't want to get into the politics of it or anything else, because I don't think it's helpful. And what we do want to do is celebrate the people who at a moment in time come together and do the best thing for those around them, whether it's building something, designing something, doing it at their kitchen table, because that did in fact stopgap many places when it was needed here. And at the same time, we want to be students of history and find out the places where, actually we had a ventilator design, and we as a country, we put $500 million into it. And why don't we have that today? I think those lessons will be ones that we're asking and looking forward. But yeah, I appreciate your thoughts there.
And again, don't get me wrong. I am not denigrating any of these people. What I'm saying is, as a public service, it's probably time to sit down and talk about these kinds of things openly and come to a consensus of how do we balance leaving the burden with what they've done on those people who, out of the goodness of their heart, invested in starting to do some of this stuff, and making it an easy enough transition so that we can start taking some of those added costs out of the system.
Yeah, well, I like the topic. How do we prepare for the future, and how do we do it in a way that that works inside of the cultures, or changing the cultures that we have as it may be? I appreciate and Reiner, you said, I think you also had a question here. Is there an appetite in Michigan for Canadian PPE? I imagine that question sort of got answered by some of the supply chain questions that we were talking here, but did you have anything specific on that?
If you're asking me what's being put together, I've got some clients who are actually doing some N95 masks. There's some talk about putting a source of N95 filter material somewhere in North America so that we're not caught the same way we have been so far. There's some folks that have some very nice designs of gown producing equipment. I mean, you know, we're all doing the same things.
Yep. No, very good. Well, I appreciate your being on here, and Olaf, thank you for checking in. I really appreciate the discussion, gentlemen. It was great. I also note that we had a comment here from our. Well, let's see, where did it go? You guys are filling up that chat window. It's great. I love it. We did hear from Leonard Brandon. Leonard will reach out and talk. Leonard's going to join us next week to talk, at least as he can publicly, about what Ford's been up to. So I hope you'll tune in next week to hear about that. I thought we had a comment there from... Well, I guess this is a question that Karen had asked regarding manufacturing of N95 in the US and the market size. Have they looked at other countries as markets that also may not want to depend on China any longer? Karen, I think that's an interesting, I don't know if I'm going to welcome you on if you have anything more you want to say about that, but it is a great question. Is the market just us, or is the market parts of the rest of the world that have come to rely too heavily on a single source? I think we do want to be careful, because as Jerry Douglas and I were talking about, there's Karen, I'm unmuting you there, Karen. There's a lot of great folks in China doing a lot of great work, and so we don't want to get bashing on it. We do recognize that with some of the politics, there's been a little bit too much of a single source going on. So none of that's supposed to be a true bashing or anything like that. But Karen, I wanted to get some more color on your question. Oh, let's see. Unmute yourself there. There she is.
Oh, great. And thanks for all that you've been doing, Jane. Yeah, what I was thinking is in no way bashing the folks that are working in China, but there's a lot of other countries too that are experiencing some of the same types of things that we are, that also may be smaller countries, but still would represent good market share. Is that something to look at? Plus also, I put another comment there. Because the N95s are used in other industries, that might also be another market to look at relative to, the cost that it would take to produce it versus the market size. Yes, only part of them are in the medical community, but I think there's a lot of commonality in the materials, how they're constructed, well, even some of the testing, as we know.
And it is interesting because I think one of the things we've all learned in the last 3 months has been that now we understand why, when you go to Home Depot and you see masks on the thing and you go, well, that one says N95 and that one just says dust mask, like why that was even there in the first place. Now we all know it a little bit too well.
Yeah.
And you do sort of wonder as more and more are being produced, obviously, we know of a lot of great folks ramping up US based production of masks and N95s and everything else. But I kind of wonder now, like, will we see more true certified N95s just in the day-to-day use? Because people are going to be like, oh, I now get what that means. That certification actually means something to me. So, I guess if I'm going to do demolition in my house, maybe I'll look for something with a little higher rating, because I realize now what that actually means. But it's an interesting question you raise.
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking of the folks that have to use it for their jobs. And kind of a personal, that was why I happen to have some N95s here. We had our home worked on last fall, and I admit I just tucked away in the corner some of the extra supplies, and I looked and went, whoa, there's 2 N95s left in there. And so it got me thinking, and all the folks that donated to the hospitals too, that had those that were, I'll say, sort of cross-referenced, they had to have them for their jobs. So I think there's a market there. What they're doing, I don't know.
I like that you brought that up, Karen. I mean, N95s in other countries, and then also just the general increase in the awareness and usage of them here could be a thing, which then creates sort of a robustness of the pipeline because we're using them more uniformly. That's great. I appreciate you bringing that up. Well, I've got you on the phone. Oh boy, I got to put her on the spot.
Uh-oh.
What do you think the most useful thing ongoing here as we tailor our direction? We definitely want to bring more folks on, more guests, talk about MedTech development in general, which is obviously going to include a COVID component. But as others have brought up today, what do you think the most important parts that we retain as we continue the COVID discussion that are going to give people what they want to hear in a forum to do so?
My first thought is that keeping the approach of being a sort of fact-checked source, I think, is going to be critical, because my first gut reaction was the same as the previous individual. There is just way too much information out there that isn't true, and I find myself starting to read some articles and stop, and it's like, okay, I've seen 3 things already that I know aren't true, so let's stop there. But the volume is so high that it's very difficult to sift through. And I know in talking with a few people that are trying to get their businesses back going, or labs or whatever it may be, the conflicting information is very difficult. They're trying to do the right thing, but it's difficult. So if there's some way to coalesce that, or put fact check sources where they know, okay, if I find that information here, or have certain topics, I haven't fully thought out how you would deliver it, but if you could somehow help that process, and I think you've already been doing that for this subset of groups, but if you could do it in a way that might be a little larger, I think it would be a good public service to the community.
Well, I appreciate that, Karen. Maybe you and I can talk offline about what that could look like. I really appreciate that. You put you on the spot and you come back with wonderful things. I really appreciate that.
Not a problem. Thanks,
That's
Gene.
great. No, I think what we're learning today from everybody is there's still a need to continue this conversation, and we certainly will. We'll continue to we're not going to make those conversations go away. The EUAs will continue to talk about whenever there's information on them. We're looking forward to hearing from Leonard from Ford next week. I understand he can only really talk about public facing things, which is just fine. We would love to hear that, because we're all interested in what's going on inside a big company like that. And that's great to hear about. So we'll continue that. We'll keep talking about the imports. We will keep trying to connect suppliers. And I think what we're going to do is we're just going to start to open it up and bring more people into that conversation. And we'll start to hear a little bit more about things that are close by, like respiratory support devices, not just the ventilators themselves. And we will continue to evolve that discussion. What other comments do you have? Questions do you have specific to EUAs, specific to products that you're working on, or in general, thoughts for where you want to go next? We're going to take one more comment before we close. We're going to end at 3 o'clock today. And I really appreciate everyone being here and all the great interaction. Last call for comments or questions. Well, this has been just absolutely wonderful. I appreciate everyone being on today. Like we said, let's recap. The COVID Connect name is probably going to go away. We want to start to open the conversation. We want to talk to other folks in the MedTech community as we move away and back into normalcy. But I think the point has come across loud and clear. We're not back to normalcy. And folks still want that resource for dealing, especially with PPE. And so we will definitely continue that conversation. Please do, I think it was good we brought that back up again today. Please do check out Pure Michigan Business Connect's connection portal, where they connect folks who do PPE manufacturing with folks who need it, because that is out there. They are looking to get you in touch. They're doing their best to vet suppliers. It's obviously not their job, but they're doing their best to look into that. And so please do make contact there if you either have PPE or you need PPE, because, excuse me, that's a great resource. With that, we will see you next Friday at 2 p.m. We're going to continue the conversation. Looking forward to hearing from our friends at Ford. We'll bring you any updates to the EUAs, and we'll begin to expand the discussion and bring in some of our friends in the MedTech community who we want to continue hearing from. So we're looking forward to expanding from here. Thank you all for being with us, and have a great weekend. Talk soon.